As a follow-up to my 10 Easy Florals YouTube video, which I posted previously, and a link to it is in the description under this video, we are going to today talk about how to put a whole bunch of different flowers together onto a page and how to compose them in a way that looks nice and looks fun, and so you're not so confused when you're trying to put all of them together. I've had a lot of people ask me how to do different floral compositions like this, and my number one piece of advice is to start largest to smallest. So put the biggest flowers on there first, and then put the smaller flowers in the page afterward to kind of fill up space. And then leaves go in last, and we are going to practice all of that. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Before we start painting, I want to really quickly talk about an important rule in composition, which is called the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds is a guideline, basically, that says if you separate your paper into thirds horizontally and vertically, then wherever those invisible lines meet, that is where you should place your most prominent subjects, because placing them along these intersections are going to be very pleasing to the eye. And then one rule, so when you do that, you're going to have 4 places, so like right here, right here, right here, and right here. And my rule is I like to work in odd numbers. So I like to either utilize one of those spaces, or I like to use 3 of them, so that I don't like things to be so like exactly even or perfect. And so that's why I like to work in odd numbers. And so when we do the rule of thirds with a page full of florals, especially if we're going to start with the biggest florals first, so on this page I would say the biggest ones are the ranunculus that I painted over here, and then the lilac that I painted over here. Using the rule of thirds is going to help us figure out where to place those big flowers. So one more thing about the rule of thirds is also, if you place your subjects along the lines, along the axes that you've created, so here or here or here or here, those are going to be pleasing to the eye as well. And so using the axes and the intersections to help you form like a natural movement can be very helpful. So in that vein, I'm going to start with the lilac, which is this kind of like cone-shaped flower with a lot of different flowers together, and I'm going to put it in this bottom corner right here and kind of have it facing upward like that. Not exactly straight, because flowers always have this kind of natural curve, right? But I'm going to use this axis, this invisible axis, as a guideline so that the cone is mostly pointing upward like that. So without further ado, I'm going to take some rosamarine for my lilac. This is Daniel Smith Rosamarine, and I'm going to get started. Okay, so I painted 2 lilacs here, and I used this kind of invisible vertical axis as a guideline to keep my lilacs, but notice I didn't just keep them like straight on the axis, but I used it to kind of paint around and give me a general direction where my lilacs should go. And then I also painted this lilac down here, so it crossed down here, and then this one kind of crosses at this intersection as well. So to keep along with my kind of rule of thirds pattern, I'm going to paint a ranunculus next, and I'm going to paint that one down here at this intersection. So if there was an axis down here and one right here, and it would cross about right here. It doesn't have to be exact. The rule of thirds is definitely not like a rule you have to follow to the T. It's more just to help give you beneficial guidelines if you're not exactly sure where to put things, where to place your subjects so that they will look like, you know, they're arranged in a pleasing way. So I'm starting with some green and yellow. And then I'm gonna paint the rest of this ranunculus and probably a few more as well. And so I'm just gonna start with the, like I said, the big flowers one at a time. And as I'm going, I'm gonna place, I did 2 of these lilacs. I think I'm gonna do maybe 3 ranunculuses, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so I have these ranunculuses in here, and I painted the lilacs, and now I'm going to paint a couple roses. So I've mostly have these like rule of thirds axes going, and now I'm going to try to pay attention to, instead of where the intersections are, I'm going to try to place as much as I can around the invisible axes. So I'm going to start by painting, I think I'm going to do maybe like 3 or 4 roses. It doesn't always have to be an odd number, but as I keep painting and keep adding to this composition, I'm just going to kind of eyeball it to see how many of each different flower I want to do. But roses are, I think the next like medium flowers that I'm going to paint are roses and maybe a black-eyed Susan and the poppy and the azalea, and then the cosmos and the forget-me-not and the lavender are going to be last. Lavender is going to for sure be last, then forget-me-nots, and the cosmos, azalea, and poppy are probably all around the same place, and then black-eyed Susan and tulip for sure after the rose. So I'm gonna paint a rose here, and I'm gonna do 3 or 4 of them. Okay, so I'm done with my roses. I've mostly tried to stay around these 3 intersections and along the axes as much as possible, a la the rule of thirds. So now I think I'm going to paint, I don't know, maybe just 1 tulip, maybe 2, I don't know. But with tulips, I like to paint the stems more than with other flowers, so that's why there's definitely not going to be a lot of them. I'm gonna do an orange tulip, so I just mix some of this permanent yellow deep with Quin Rose, and yeah, I think I'm going to paint a tulip here and then paint the stem kind of going behind the flowers like that. So let's start with the first petal. So before I finish this tulip, I just want to, these tulips, because there are 2, I just want to point out that one really cool thing about tulips really are their leaves. They have these really long, like wide leaves. And so I'm not painting the specific leaves to all of these flowers, but for the tulip I am. And so for the tulip leaf, I kind of just come up from the stem just like that and use the full pressure of my paintbrush, so all the bristles, and then lift up so that it's kind of skinny like that, and have it taper so like the edge of this leaf is a little jagged. And you can do 1 leaf off to the side of these tulips like that, or you can do 2. So maybe I'm gonna have a leaf coming up behind it like that, and have it be this kind of jagged tulip leaf. Yeah, maybe I'll do 2 just coming up behind it, this tulip looks just like that. And then we're gonna paint more leaves once we've finished placing all of the flowers, but I did want to make a note about those tulip leaves. So I know at this point this is kind of looking like a wreath. It's not going to be a wreath, but that is, when you use all 4 intersections using the rule of thirds, it does kind of encourage you to make a circle. So that's something interesting to note. So we did tulips, and now let's move on to a black-eyed Susan, and then an azalea, and then a poppy. So I think maybe just 1 black-eyed Susan, and I'm going to put it right here. Mostly because black-eyed Susans, I think, take up kind of a lot of space. Not that they're bigger than all the other flowers, but they just have a lot more elements to them. And so only having 1 is a good way to keep, to kind of make the composition not quite as busy. So that's why I'm deciding only to do 1 black-eyed Susan. And for the record, if you're watching me paint these flowers and wish that there was some kind of explanation as to why I'm painting them the way that I am, make sure you watch my previous video, 10 easy watercolor florals, which again is linked in the description below, because that is the video where I do paint all of these flowers and give you a rundown of how I am painting and forming the flowers the way that they look right now. So there are the petals to this Black-Eyed Susan, and now I'm going to get some black and paint in the center for it. All right, so there's my Black-Eyed Susan. And again, I clustered it kind of right in this section right here, right in this cross section via the rule of thirds. So now let's paint some poppies and azaleas, and then we'll go on to cosmos. First, let's do poppies. So I'm gonna take some permanent red and mix it together with some of this Quin Rose and permanent yellow deep, just so I can get a nice red orange for a poppy. And I'm going to, I think, put my poppy, one of them right here. I think I'm gonna paint 2, maybe 3 poppies. So I'm gonna go ahead and paint those. Okay, so I painted the beginnings of these poppies. I haven't painted in the black parts yet, but I will do that once these dry. I did want to note though that for all of these flowers, when I'm painting multiples of the same flower, I make sure to put them in a slightly different direction, make sure they don't look exactly perfect, and that way I'm embracing the imperfect nature of flowers. So, and also having a little bit of diversity and complexity by having the flowers be different shapes helps make these floral paintings more pleasing as well. So we've done some poppies. Now let's do a few azaleas. I think that I'm going to do 4 azaleas, maybe 5, I don't know yet. We're running out of space, as you can see, so azaleas are the next biggest flower, and then cosmos. And then lavender and forget-me-nots are gonna be our small flowers that we're gonna dot in between and have as like fillers. So those flowers plus leaves. So maybe not 4, maybe like 3 azaleas and 2 cosmos is what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna go ahead and paint those now. Before I paint them though, I just want to talk about, like we've been talking about the rule of thirds, but I want to, so let's maybe make a game plan of where I'm going to put these flowers. So I put the poppies by these cross sections. I also talked about how usually I like to only do like 3 of the 4 intersections, but with these flowers it kind of has turned into using all 4. So that's where I'm going to keep that's where I'm going to try to stay in along these 4 intersections, and some of the flowers might pop into the middle, but for the most part, if I'm gonna have flowers in the middle, it's not gonna be very many, and it's not gonna be really big ones. So if I like wanted to paint an azalea, I wouldn't do it smack dab in the middle. I would do it like closer to one of the axes, and then have the middle by the end. The middle will be more like leaves or stems or filler flowers, but not any of the main flowers that you see here. So that's just one note as I start painting these azaleas, and I will continue to do an analysis as I go along. Okay, so I put down the azaleas and the cosmos, and I went ahead and added details to the poppies and the cosmos and the azaleas. And so I kept a lot of this movement and kept some of this place, the middle spaces free. And so now that I have most of the like really big flowers on there, I'm going to fill up the rest of the white space, first doing bunches of forget-me-nots, and then a few strands of lilacs. I mean, this is a lilac, these are lavender. And then I'm going to wrap it up with some grass and maybe some leaves also in there. So let's start with the forget-me-nots. I think that I'm going to do like a bunch of forget-me-nots right here, and a bunch of forget-me-nots right there, and then a bunch of forget-me-nots right there. And then on the outsides and in the middle, after all of that is done, is where I'm going to place the lavender and where I'm going to place leaves and grass to fill in the spaces. I want to note also that I think one of the biggest problems with painting bunches of flowers like this, and I should note, I didn't go to art school. I taught myself how to do this. I Googled a lot of things, I've practiced, and this is just my method. There is no like perfect way to do it. And some of you might be watching thinking, oh, there's a much better way, in which case I encourage you to make your own YouTube video. But for me, this is the method that works really well. And also another method that works really well is just to remember that imperfect is beautiful, and to remember that you being uncomfortable and not knowing exactly where to place the flowers is kind of part of the gig. It is hard to know exactly what to do, but artists never know exactly what to do. That's the whole point. When you're creating, you're experimenting and messing around and being brave, and sometimes it's uncomfortable, but the more you do it, the more you're going to be able to tolerate that discomfort, and you're going to find the most awesome breakthroughs, and you're going to find that you can paint just about anything if you're willing to paint it badly. And I know that sounds bad, but when you're willing to paint it, that's one step closer to actually doing it the way that you want to, and the way that is going to really unlock your creativity. So if you're unsure of where to put something, lean into that and just put it down. Don't be afraid to waste paper. Don't be afraid to waste paint. Just don't be afraid. Do it, and if it's not exactly how you like it, that's okay. Do it differently next time. So to paint our forget-me-nots, now that I have gotten off that little diatribe, I'm just going to mix some blue-violet for the forget-me-nots and start painting my clumps. So forget-me-nots are much smaller than every other flower, and they have 4 petals on them. And usually they come in like bunches like this. So bunches of 3 or 4 or 5. That's kind of what I'm where I'm going with this. So I'm gonna go ahead and paint my forget-me-nots. So one benefit to painting the smaller flowers last is that you can kind of squeeze them in between the other flowers, and that is definitely why it's a good idea to go from biggest to smallest, because you know, if we tried to fit a lilac, for example, in between other flowers, it wouldn't really work, right? So that's why going from biggest to smallest is the most helpful, so that you can use these little flowers to kind of fill in those white spaces. And that's also what the grass and the leaves are going to be for. So the last flower that we're going to paint we're going to paint a few stalks of lavender. And so I'm just going to take some light value green, aka really watery green, and I think I'm going to paint like a few lilacs. I keep calling them lilacs, lavender stalks, just to kind of crisscross this way. So they're crossing the middle, but the flowers are really going to be more in the corners, and facing the axes, which is what we want. And then after I have the flowers there, then I will work on filling in the rest of the white space with some leaves. So let's paint these lavender flowers first, just by dotting on some purple buds. Lavender are really small flowers, and so when I'm painting them, especially when I'm painting them with big ones, I'm really just painting a bunch of purple blobs. And I'm not going to leave the middle like this, just like a cross. I'm going to put some leaves and grass after, but first I'm going to paint some more lavender elsewhere. So maybe I'm going to put some up here, especially when painting like stalk kind of flowers, or like flowers that can almost be grass. It's nice to have them be poking out of your arrangement in some places. And when we do paint grass as well, I'm going to talk about that also. But those ones I'm going to call my lavender pieces, and let's add some more buds to them. Okay, and last but not least, let's add some grass and leaves. So I'm gonna do leaves first because leaves are more of a shape, tend to be bigger than little pieces of grass. I'm not gonna do like tons of leaves, but I am gonna do some to kind of give a little border around the flowers. This is one of my tricks when I do wreaths, is to paint the florals first and then go in a circle. And if you use a watercolor block, it's easier because you can like physically twist the paper that you're on, but just like go in a circle and paint a bunch of leaves. Sometimes they can be single, sometimes they can be, if you have double leaves, I recommend having a mix of both, of some single leaves and some leaves that are kind of in a bunch, because leaves often come in lots of different shapes and sizes, and so capturing that diversity will be important in making this look realistic. So I'm actually going to just paint leaves around this tulip. Okay. And important to note also when you're painting leaves is, and just any kind of loose floral arrangement, you don't have to, you know, see where it connects to the flower necessarily. We're not going for super realistic here. We're just trying to put a bunch of elements together that look nice together. So I'm definitely going to put a leaf in between, a leaf or two in between this lilac and the lavender, just so I can have a separation since I use the same color for those two. And I'm not really caring much where the leaves go or if they're perfect. I know that's something that I've said a lot, so you might be tired of me saying it, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's important. Having perfect leaves is not the point. You also don't only have to keep the leaves on the outside. You can put some by where the flowers are as well. And if you cover up some of the flowers that you've already painted, that's totally fine as well. It just creates even more texture when you cover up things. So it's like you're creating depth because there are different layers that you're working with. So that's something that is important to note. And so I'm just gonna finish going around the circle with leaves, and then I'm gonna go back and add little blades of grass to fill in the rest of the white space. Now that we have some leaves, I'm just going to fill in a lot of the rest of this white space with some blades of grass. Okay, so I added in all of the grass and all of the leaves. I added a few other leaves on this end because I felt like this end was just a little leaf heavy, and so just to add a slightly more balanced look. It's not completely balanced, but just a little bit. And then I wanted to point out also that I added some grass like in between the Black-Eyed Susan and the lilac, because these are both the same color flower, and so I wanted some way to like differentiate between them. And that's another great way to use grass as you're filling in the white space on these big floral compositions. So that wraps up my big floral composition piece. I used a lot of colors here. Mostly I used kind of analogous colors, so like orange and red and pink and purple are all kind of close to each other on the color wheel, and then the green just adds a nice contrast to that piece. But there are a lot of different flowers going on. It's a little bit busy, so in the future, when I do another one of these, I might do like fewer flowers or fewer different kinds of flowers, but for the most part I think it looks really cool. And we utilized the rule of thirds to know where to place the flowers, to have them definitely be a big full page, be in a bunch, but still have some kind of guideline as to where to keep them so that there's at least a little bit of a flow. And again, it's not perfect. Painting loose florals is a little messy sometimes, but that's because it's loose. The whole point is for you to stretch yourself and to stretch your creativity. And so I hope that this video helped you to be a little braver in attempting pieces like this. And if you liked this video, I would love for you to subscribe so that you don't miss any of my other tutorials. And if you decided to try out this piece and post it to Instagram, please tag me. My handle is thiswritingdesk, and I would love to see your handiwork. So once again, thanks for joining me, and I will see you next time.